Welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Welcome to Two Roads Crossing. I'm your host, Curtis Gibbs. We're glad to have you with our Christian Veterinary Mission podcast, where we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. And today we're on the road with Dr. Sara-Louise Newcomer. Sara-Louise, good to have you with us today.
Thanks, Curtis. It's good to be here.
Where are you coming to us from, SL?
I am in the panhandle of Texas, tiny little town called Canyon.
Okay. And you guys moved out there just a couple of years ago, right?
It has been about 4 years now.
4 years. Okay.
Yeah.
For a long time, you were at this place. If you're watching on YouTube, you see over the shoulder that Sara-Louise and BJ were at her husband. We're at Auburn. And then your alma mater is also over my shoulder. I might cover these up because this is a family show. And to have Florida and Auburn banners I just get a lot of comments about people being offended by them. So it's
right. Yeah.
Never got a comment about the dogs over my head here. So there you go. Well, Sara-Louise, we've been connected for a long time, and you've been connected with CVM for a long time. And so we'd like to have a conversation about student ministry because, BJ was a teacher. You've been involved in CVFs and all these kind of things. I should say professor, I suppose. You've been involved in all these kind of things and in the schools too as well. But I'd first like to just kind of start out a little bit with your journey. So could you tell us a little bit about, the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine for you? Where did that start?
Yeah, that is, it's funny that you say that topic because that is especially personal for me because I became a believer in vet school. And so growing up in the South, I would have told you that I was a Christian. I went to church growing up. I went to church through undergrad. I was going to church my freshman year of veterinary school, and I did not know the Lord Jesus. And so my freshman year of vet school was pretty wild. I think God managed to keep me in there. And then before I started veterinary school, I was diagnosed with a rare illness and had my entire large intestine removed. And I remember telling my surgeon, look, I don't care what you do. I got to start vet school in the fall. Like I was one of those type A focused. This is the only thing that I'd ever wanted to do since I was 5. Like, I think that's a pretty classic story for us veterinarians. Yeah. And so made it through a pretty major surgery and then started vet school. And at the end of my first year of vet school, I found out I was going to have another surgery. And that led to having to take my second year of veterinary school off to start chemotherapy because I had these benign tumors that were growing pretty rapidly. And that was the year that I came to Christ. I was back home with my parents. I lost my hair within 2 weeks. Decided to go to this Bible study, and there was this sweet little retired pastor couple that was leading this Bible study, and they loved me and prayed over me. And I can just say that it was that year, as a 23-year-old home living with my parents, that God just removed the scales from my eyes. And so I was back in Gainesville about to start back to vet school when somebody called and asked something about me being a believer. And I was like, yeah, of course I'm a Christian. Like, what else would I be? And they were like, no, have you ever, do you have a relationship with Jesus? Like, you ever prayed? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, long story short, came to Christ right before starting back to vet school as my second year. And that was just really incredible because I was still figuring out veterinary school. But at that point, then I was also figuring out what does it look like to be a believer and to walk with Jesus in all things. And I will always say that God combined my faith and veterinary medicine in a way that I wasn't able to separate them. And by God's grace, what also entered in for me as a new believer, as a second year veterinary student, was my Christian Veterinary Fellowship group.
Mm.
And so got involved with that group. Like everything was new, everything, like my eyes were wide open and I was so excited about things. But CVF was just integral. And so I learned veterinary medicine and found a good church and was going to church and was just learning everything about our faith as I walked through veterinary school. And because of having a CVF group, that meant I was connected with CVM. And so I had spiritual parents and grandparents and men and women that were brought around me through going to my first real life, real impact weekend. And it was at University of Tennessee and meeting people like Kit Flowers and other people like that. And they became these huge role models of what it looked like to live out your faith as a veterinarian. And so that was how it happened. And so I grew exponentially through veterinary school, had a number of other health crises. I think many of my spiritual parents in CVM are always slightly worried that something's going to happen to me because of the various health things that happened. I went on a mission trip to Bolivia and ended up having to have major surgery and spent 10 days in the hospital surrounded by people that loved me and prayed for me and all of these things. So yeah, that's kind of how it began.
Those are, it's how when you read something in the Bible and it's like, and Moses spent 15 years in the desert, and it's like a sentence. Those major health things are like a sentence in your story. Those are huge. Like you missed your second year of vet school, or you had to take it remotely. How would you did you have moments during those seasons where you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to finish this, or God, why did you do this? How did you move through those seasons of some major health crisis?
Yeah, so having to take that year off, there wasn't a choice. And then because of the chemotherapy, like I thought I was going to die because of the chemotherapy. Like it was a rough year. And so it was just kind of survival, just trying to like survive. Like it was just kind of moment by moment. And then at the end of that year was when I had accepted Jesus and started walking with the Lord. And so then things really started to shift. But, when I had surgery in Bolivia and spent 10 days in the hospital, like there was really, I can't explain it any way other than supernatural grace in those early years because my health didn't affect me. Did it affect everyone else around me? Yeah, it did. But it was like, I was either totally fine, like, okay, God, what are we doing? Or I was in the hospital and something else major was happening. And it really didn't steer me away. And I think, I will say, and we don't have to get into this, but like, I think there were a couple of, not ultimatums, but God, we can do whatever, but I want to be a veterinarian. Like I really felt that I wanted to be called to that. I didn't want it to stop me from what I was doing. And ultimately, I really wanted to be able to have children. And I became a veterinarian and God has not answered our prayer in regards to having biological children. And so that was kind of a no. And so when you talk about those crossroads, one was a yes and one was a no. And all of it is sanctifying big time.
Yeah. You mentioned Bolivia, and I was just recently having a conversation. This might be like asking you about your health, but this might be bearing the lead of, you coming to Christ. That's a pretty incredible story. It makes me think, though, I was having a recent conversation with Dr. Sam Galfin, and he was, I believe, one of the doctors that was with you in Bolivia that spent some time with you was his old partner. Sam tells a story about, and I forget that doc's name, and I think, may he rest in peace. I think he's passed on, but that one of the things that Sam wanted to come to Bolivia to see that doctor, because when he knew him, he was one of the least people you'd expect to come to Christ, is how Sam would delicately put it, right? And and this was a guy who gave his life to Christ, moved to Bolivia, stayed with you in the hospital during those 10 days. And I'm kind of hearing a little bit of comparison too. I wonder if when somebody would have maybe seen freshman year SL, if they'd have been like, you mentioned it was a little wild. So what, and we all have those part of our journeys.
Yeah.
Like that's what the prodigal. So I guess what would you say to the Sam Galfins of this world, or to some of your classmates, those people that they look at somebody and they're like, that person isn't with the Lord yet. I'm not sure that they are going to get there. We do that, but look at you now, look at that guy. Like what do you say to people when they're like, don't give up on that part? Like, how do you look at people that you think aren't going to come to the Lord, but you've walked that journey yourself?
Yeah. So I love hearing that story. And so I have to say, Jim Nash is the person that you're referring to. That was Sam Galfin's partner. And Sam knew him then. I knew Jim Nash as a believer, and he was in his 60s when I met him, and he was a dairy veterinarian. And he was one of my mentors, and he was one of those that when I met him, I was fairly certain he'd been a believer for all of his life. That was the transformation. Sure. Yep. That was how significant it was. And we were on that mission trip in Bolivia, and someone was going to share their testimony every morning. And we asked Dr. Nash, and he's with the Lord now, I should say. He passed away a number of years ago, but he said, I can't do it right now. I need to, I'm going to have to pause. I need to pray. And being a young little fiery believer, I was like, nobody says no when somebody asks you to share your testimony.
You always be ready to give a reason for the hope for which you prepare. Yeah. Yep.
That is it. And I was just like, what? And I was so confused and shocked and probably a little judgy in that, and we went through that day because we were doing testimonies in the morning. And that evening he said, for like the closing time at the end of the day, he said, okay, I'm ready to share. And when he started to share his testimony, he said, and I'm not sure I can say this without tears. He said, I hesitate every time someone asks me to share my story, because I know what my story is and what the Lord has done. And I'm always afraid that someone is going to judge me because of my life. And he was like, and so I have to pray and ask the Lord to prepare me to share again. Wow. And then he shared his testimony that evening. And he talked about, I think at that point he'd been a believer for 11 years, and talked about the marriages that had failed, and addiction and all of these things. And he talked about the men that loved him to Christ. And it was the most gripping story that would remind anyone of what the Lord can do in his timing. And it was life-changing for me, because I was like, wow. And so interestingly, one of the things that came out of veterinary school and coming to Christ and walking with the Lord, I had classmates that I had gone through my freshman year together. And when I took that year off, there were a couple that kept up with me. One was a friend that I had known prior to vet school. We had been anesthesia techs together. And the other one was this guy that was in my class. Well, fast forward, I'm a believer. I'm now in my second year. They're now in their third year. And about halfway through this year, this guy that I thought was pretty good looking, we ended up kind of starting to date. And his classmates, my previous classmates, were like, you don't know who she is. Like, she is not for you.
Yeah.
This
So
is
they thought, yeah, they had frozen you in what they knew you, which was not that long ago, but still.
absolutely.
Yeah.
They had seen all the things that I had done when my husband wasn't at, or sorry, when this guy wasn't at the parties, and I was, and so there were all of these things. They were like, she is not your type. And the funny thing was, it wasn't like it was a whole bunch of Christians, but it was a whole bunch of people that had seen. We've seen how you behave, and we've seen how she behaves, and
Yeah.
and so this guy who I slipped, he's my husband now. Um, uh, he was like, yeah, she's different, and so he defended me, and so yeah, I to fully answer your question, I think we have to pray and trust that God can do absolutely miraculous things in His timing, in His way. Yeah, it's pretty good stuff.
Uh, that is, and good for BJ. When you said you kind of let a secret out that BJ was your husband, I was like, does BJ know he's your husband? No. We know. Is he aware of this yet? No. Good for him for defending and seeing the fruit of a difference in your life, and because we can change that quick, people can change that fast. That is what redemption, salvation, transformation brings. But I what I'm trying to battle against is what your classmates. It's kind of hard for us. Like we might look at somebody in youth group and know, okay, they're not who they really are yet. But
Yep.
once you hit like vet school and beyond, especially what Jim Nat, like if you were Sam Galvin in this case and we're his partner, and there might be a story of where they were going to settle their disagreements outside with some fisticuffs, like you kind of go, all right, that dude is never going to change. And yet look at him. Like it's like we believe that God can change people here, but when we're with somebody who irritates us or worse, or they're just not with Christ and they're in a full grown adult, you're like, you almost feel like they missed their window or something. Does that make sense? That's not correct, but is that, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, so tell us, bring us up to speed. You and BJ, obviously that worked out and is still working out. You guys dated through vet school, that kind of thing.
Yeah. We dated on and off through vet school. He was a year ahead of me, and he reminds me now, which I chuckle at, because we were at a Purina lunch at a veterinary conference. We'd gone to the student thing, and we'd only been dating for a couple of weeks, and he was like, so I'm going to be a long-term missionary in Latin America. And I was like, you're going to do what? And I didn't understand what that meant. I wasn't really familiar with missionaries. And he had grown up a missionary kid. His parents were missionaries when he was younger in Guatemala. And so that was just a part of his plan. That was a part of his vision. That was the reason he went to vet school. He had already really combined those two things together. And so I was like, okay, yeah, sure. But he was like, like, it wasn't like he was like running me off to Guatemala with him or wherever. He was like, you kind of have to be called, like, hold up on that. And so it was really kind of fun, because I really thought, as we got to know Christian Veterinary Mission as veterinary students, I really thought that God was probably just going to use him to introduce me to missions, because the summer after my second year of veterinary school, I went with CVM to Honduras with Dr. Charles Cobb, who's still taking students to Honduras.
He's probably there right now.
It's true. You're exactly right. And so I went on my first mission trip, and my eyes were open to like how God uses veterinarians around the world, and how that faith is combined with our profession. And I always say, no animal comes to the vet alone. And that's what I saw. I saw all of these people in Honduras bringing their pets, and the opportunities that God opened through this bridge, the animal. And so anyway, as we kind of dated, but BJ was really committed to this. I'm going to be a long-term missionary. I wasn't so sure. And I think I had a lot of growing in my faith to do. And so anyway, he graduated and he moved to California. He'd always wanted to be a dairy vet. And so he was in a big dairy practice out there, and he was there for a couple of years. And then he went with CBM to Central African Republic. And so he went to language school. And so right about the time I was graduating and thinking I would move to California, I'd accepted a job out there. He was like, yeah, sorry, I'm going overseas. And so I broke up with him for probably the fourth time. I was like, that's it, I'm done. And, but then, to finish my story, I graduated, and I thought I was going to go to California to work in a mixed practice. I didn't pass California boards. That was a tough one. But I had planned on going on a mission trip to Bolivia again. So I went back to Bolivia. And the whole time I was in Bolivia, I just felt like the Lord was saying, go home and work with your dad. And so I should clarify, my dad was a veterinarian. He graduated from Auburn in 75. And he'd always expected me to come back and work with him. And I had never once thought, I think I'll work with my dad.
You're the retirement plan, right?
Yeah. I was absolutely his exit strategy, no doubt. And so before I went to Bolivia, because I didn't pass California boards, I decided not to go to California, and it was like going to kind of pause. And so I worked with my dad before I went on this trip just for a few weeks, and confirmed that I actually did hate it. And I was like, that's a hard no. And so then I went to Bolivia, and God kept saying, go home and work with your dad, go home and work with your dad. And so I came back from Bolivia, and I was like, good news, God told me to come work with you. So that's what I'm going to do. And he was like, what? So I ended up working with my dad that first year out of practice. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. But about September, I found out that I was going to have another surgery because of these tumors that had presented themselves in my life since, my diagnosis. And so I was thankful, very thankful, that I was working with my dad and not working with somebody else, because it was always a major deal. And my surgeon at that time was in Boston. And so anyway, but right before we headed up to Boston for my next surgery, I came home from work on my dad's 50th birthday, and he was really drunk. And long story short, I was furious with the Lord. My dad was an alcoholic, and I was like, this is not what I signed up for. Like, this is not what I'm doing. And anyway, later that evening, because of being obedient only to the Lord, I went up to see my dad, and God opened the door for me to lead him to Christ. And so that first year out of practice, my dad came to the Lord. And that first year, as I was working with my dad in the morning, we were studying John and going through studying the Bible together. And man, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. My dad was 50, and he was a serious alcoholic at that point, and never would I have ever thought that he would have come to Christ. And what a glorious thing. It was great working with my dad. I will always have those memories. It was way better studying the Bible with him and watching him grow in his excitement for the Word of God and for what God was doing in him, and helping him literally to have to come to terms with trusting God with my health, because that was kind of the crux of the matter. Was he said, Sara-Louise, I fix animals. I'm a veterinarian. This is what I do. And I can't fix you, and I can't handle that. And I said, that wasn't ever your job. And you aren't ever supposed to walk this alone. Like, Dad, like, I'm okay because I'm walking with Jesus, and I'm going to trust him with whatever happens with my life, which includes my health, with the hard and the good. And that's what the Lord wants you to do. And so, so that was just a really incredible part of our story.
You were you were sent to Nineveh. I mean, you were Jonah, like, I don't want to go. I mean, right? Like,
Yes.
that's, like when you're given your task from God and it's like, here, open this scroll. This is what you're to do. And you're like, absolute, like, but look at the fruit on the other side of that. That is, your dad turned 50 and also won in the same day with his spiritual birthday. Like, that's pretty incredible. Yeah. And it's just a reminder to never give up on people. I mean, whether it's a freshman student or a dairy vet that's a couple divorces in, or your father that's, walking through some, alcoholic abuse and or alcoholism, I should say. And, into his adulthood, like, you just never know when God's gonna turn somebody around.
Yeah, it's true. And it requires trust in him, and also a willingness to speak boldly about your faith, even when you don't know how it's going to go, but we're not writing the script. He is. And and it's kind of fun because I should say, as I fast forward at the end of that year working with Dad, I still didn't want to work with Dad. And Dad was in such a different place, and he knew it. And he basically gave me his blessing to say, go do what you're supposed to do. Like, I know the Lord has something else for you. And it was literally the next day that I talked to Kit Flowers, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this career, but I need help. And he was like, funny that we should be having this phone call because we just had a board meeting at CVM and we're looking for a director of student ministries. Like, what do you think about that? And so, fast forward, I was given the privilege and the honor of working with CVM as the director of students. But the most fun thing was then going back to one of my dad's vet school reunions at Auburn. And it was that same story. His classmates were like, wait, hold up. Rob Roberts has become a believer. And also Rob Roberts has a daughter that's a missionary. Like, what? Like, mind blown, And so it's just this like reiteration of, trust and see what the Lord can do, because it is far greater than what we could ever imagine or,
Well, as we say in the South, sometimes that'll preach right there. I'd like to talk to you more about students, but we're going to do that in the next episode. So, but for now, just what a great reminder to not give up on people and to share about, whether it's, like I said, a freshman veterinary student or somebody who's owned a practice for a long time. God can change people's lives anytime. And, we can't see it sometimes, but we have to hold on to that faith. And so, Sara-Louise, thank you for sharing with us today and giving us just a real good picture of the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you were blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.